Before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know that I have a new book that is available on Kindle, and it is called Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. 50 pages long, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. Other than that, it's $3.99. So again, that is Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. And now, on with the podcast.
I had to do adult thing. I had to go for a physical. Yeah. During the physical, the doctor asked me, he goes, "Are you and your wife planning on having children?" And I said, "We talked about it." And he goes, "Well, if you want your wife to have a successful pregnancy, no complications, no health issues with the baby, my recommendation is you stop smoking pot." So I've decided I'm going to get a second opinion. His whole thing was, he goes, "Gary, if you're smoking pot, your sperm might not fertilize your wife's egg. Like, according to him, my sperm might be on the way to the egg and then just be like, what's that?" Is that McDonald's? Because I'm pretty hungry right now.
Good morning. It's Friday, Fight Song Friday, May the 29th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company and fight songs. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company.
Buddy, Varney and Company picks it up now. Stu, take it away.
Oh, that weekend. Good morning, Maria. Good morning, everyone. It is the end of the week. It's the end of the month. And just look at that market go. Investors are happy. They're checking their 401ks again. Rallies are fun. Dow Industrial is up about 140 points. Then there's green, a little bit of it, for the S&P up 9. NASDAQ up 40 points. One stock going straight up, and that is Dell. Revenue up 750%. The stock is up 270% in the last 12 months. Yes, it is AI connected. It's up another 33% this morning. Oil, that's down today, down around $87 a barrel. That is helping stocks. Interest rates, though, little changed. We have the 10-year still below 4.5%. That's the 10-year Treasury. The 2-year right around the 4% level, 4.02 right now. Bitcoin, well, that's in the low $70,000 range. 73.1 is your quote. War news. Treasury Secretary Bessent says the U.S. and Iran have the makings of a deal, his words. It includes a gradual reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and Iranian pledges to halt some nuclear work. President Trump has yet to sign off on this deal. Politics. Spencer Pratt, the complete outsider in LA's mayoral race, has moved up in the polls. He's now a close challenger to current mayor Karen Bass and socialist Nithya Raman. It is now Bass 26, Raman 25, Pratt 22. Imagine the upset if a big American city were no longer run by a woke or socialist mayor. Big setback for Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin rocket. It exploded on the launch pad in Florida. It was a test of a rocket that will send Amazon satellites into orbit. There were no satellites on board last night. Whoa, a tough commute in New York City. An engine caught fire in a Hudson River tunnel. 5 injured. All train services in and out of Penn Station suspended. There are times when it's good to work from home on a Friday. And it is Friday today, May 29th, last trading day of the month. Varney and Company is about to begin.
And so it is. Nonprofit news now. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the Cold War.
Valentin Savitsky had already made up his mind. His crew called him the captain, who never flinched. His superiors called him exactly the kind of officer you wanted on a covert mission into enemy waters. Tonight, with American destroyers circling 60 meters above his hull and his submarines suffocating at the bottom of the Atlantic, Savitsky was ordering his officers to prepare the nuclear torpedo for launch. The internal temperature had reached 45 degrees Celsius. The carbon dioxide scrubbers were failing. Men were losing consciousness on the deck, and nobody was moving them because there was nowhere to move them to. Savitsky had not received a signal from Moscow in 4 days. For all he knew, the war had already started. There was one man in that submarine who could stop him, and that man had been in a dying submarine before. Savitsky's order, nuclear torpedo armed, loaded, ready, came within a single signature of execution. Under the specific protocol governing B-59, 3 officers had to agree before that weapon fired. On most Soviet submarines, only 2 signatures were required, but the brigade chief of staff happened to be aboard B-59 as his command vessel, which meant a 3rd authorization was needed. The captain agreed, the political officer agreed. The 3rd officer was Vasily Arkhipov. He said no. But to understand why Arkhipov's refusal carried weight, why Savitsky, a commander who outranked him on the boat's own hierarchy, actually listened, we need to go back 14 months to a Soviet submarine that was already dying in the Arctic Ocean, and the event that made Vasily Arkhipov the only man in that torpedo room anyone would follow into the dark. Arkhipov had already survived 1 nuclear catastrophe. Savitsky knew it. Everyone on B-59 knew it. And when the moment came, that history was the only thing standing between an argument and a war. The Soviet Navy did not produce men who second-guessed orders. It produced men who executed them. The ones who asked too many questions were reassigned to desk postings in cities nobody wanted to be in. Vasily Arkhipov had spent a decade learning to be exactly the kind of officer the Soviet Navy wanted. Then, in the summer of 1961, he learned what happened when every officer on a submarine was exactly that kind of officer, and nobody asked the question that needed asking. In July 1961, Arkhipov was executive officer aboard K-19, the Soviet Union's first nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, Project 658. 3 R-13 ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads, the most destructive object the Soviet Navy had ever put to sea. On July 3rd, 1961, the primary cooling system of K-19's reactor failed completely. The reactor core temperature began climbing toward 800 degrees Celsius, a meltdown in Arctic waters, with no rescue possible and no protocol for what they were facing. The captain ordered a repair team into the reactor compartment. 8 sailors entered. They built an improvised cooling system with their hands, with pipes cannibalized from elsewhere in the boat, with whatever they could find. It worked. 7 of the 8 men who entered that compartment died within a week. Arkhipov helped manage the evacuation into NATO waters. He wrote the after-action report. He watched the Soviet government bury the story for 28 years. What he carried out of K-19 was not the trauma that breaks men. It was the specific, technical understanding that nuclear weapons killed without intention, that the same physics that made them weapons made them accidents, and that the only thing separating one from the other was the discipline of the men holding the authorization key. In September 1962, Arkhipov was assigned as Brigade Chief of Staff for Submarine Group 69, which consisted of 4 Foxtrot-class diesel submarines, B-4, B-36, B-59, and B-130. Their destination, the Caribbean Sea. Their sealed orders were to be opened only after they had cleared the Norwegian Sea. What those orders contained and what Moscow had specifically chosen not to tell the submarine captains about the weapons already loaded in their torpedo tubes is the detail that made October 27th possible. If Cold War impact is the kind of history you've been looking for, the decisions made under nuclear pressure that still determine how today's world operates, subscribe now. On April the 17th, 1961, 1400 CI. A trained Cuban exiles landed on the southwestern coast of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. The operation was designed to trigger a popular uprising against Fidel Castro. Kennedy had inherited the plan from Eisenhower. He had approved it, then refused to authorize the air cover that might have made it work. For Nikita Khrushchev, the failure confirmed something he had suspected since meeting Kennedy in Vienna 2 months earlier, that the American president was young, uncertain, and could be pressured. But Khrushchev had a second problem, and it was more structural than political. In 1961, the United States had deployed 15 Jupiter intermediate-range ballistic missiles in Turkey. Each one was capable of striking Moscow with a 1.44 megaton warhead in approximately 8 minutes. Khrushchev described this as a gun pressed to the head of the Soviet Union. His response was symmetrical. Beginning in May 1962, Operation Anadir moved 41,902 Soviet military personnel, 36 R-12 medium-range ballistic missiles, and unknown to every American intelligence analyst, 100 tactical nuclear warheads to Cuba. Among those 100 weapons was the nuclear torpedo loaded into the tube of submarine B-59. The submarine captains were told their weapons were conventional. This was a deliberate lie, and it is the reason that, 6 weeks later, a Soviet captain in the Atlantic would try to start a nuclear war with a weapon he had been told he did not have. On October 14th, 1962, Major Richard Heiser flew a U-2 reconnaissance aircraft over western Cuba at an altitude of 22,065 meters, 72,395 feet. He was in Cuban airspace for 6 minutes. His cameras took 928 photographs. The photographs were developed at 3 a.m. on October 15th. By morning, analysts at the CIA National Photographic Interpretation Center had identified what they were looking at. Medium-range ballistic missile launch sites, under construction, active. But George Bundy informed Kennedy at 8:45 a.m. on October the 16th. Kennedy immediately called for a meeting of his principal advisors. By 11:50 that morning, NPIC Director Arthur Lundahl and his analysts were briefing the president in the cabinet room on exactly what the photographs showed. Kennedy convened what would become the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. XCOM, 14 men, 13 days. What none of those 14 men knew was that the missiles were already operational. The 10-day window Kennedy believed he had was already closed before the first meeting ended. General Curtis LeMay had a simple argument. 500 air sorties over 48 hours, 33 identified military facilities. The missiles destroyed before they became a diplomatic crisis or a military one. LeMay told Kennedy directly that a naval blockade was the equivalent of appeasement at Munich. The Joint Chiefs voted unanimously for immediate airstrikes. Kennedy sat with the word appeasement for a moment. Then he said, "You are talking about the kind of strike that is not going to be surgical. You are going to kill a lot of Russians." What LeMay's plan could not account for, because no American analyst had confirmed its existence, was 100 tactical nuclear weapons already on Cuban soil, and 4 Soviet submarines in the Atlantic carrying 1 nuclear torpedo each. An airstrike that killed Soviet personnel would have handed authorization to every Soviet commander in that theater simultaneously. Kennedy announced his decision on October the 20th, 1962. He chose the blockade. The generals believed Kennedy had chosen the cautious path. The cautious path had 4 nuclear submarines moving toward it at 13 knots. On October 22nd, 1962, at 7 p.m. Eastern, Kennedy addressed the American people. He chose the word quarantine deliberately. Under international law, a blockade is an act of war. Approaching the quarantine line from the northeast were 30 Soviet cargo ships carrying the remaining nuclear equipment for the Cuban missile sites. Beneath the Atlantic, running silent at maximum depth, was submarine group 69. The Soviet ships held course. Khrushchev told his presidium they were face-to-face with the risk of thermonuclear war. On the morning of October 24th at 10:32 a.m., American reconnaissance confirmed that 16 Soviet ships had stopped dead in the Atlantic. 6 had turned around. Secretary of State Dean Rusk leaned across the table to George Bundy and said they were eyeball to eyeball, and he thought the other fellow just blinked. The surface crisis was diffusing. 40 fathoms beneath the Atlantic, 4 submarines had received no orders, no updates, and no explanation for why the ships above them had stopped moving. The public crisis moved through formal channels. The private crisis moved through a hallway conversation that neither government officially acknowledged for 25 years. On the evening of October 26th, Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrinin met privately with Robert Kennedy at the Justice Department. The message from Khrushchev was direct: remove the Jupiter missiles from Turkey, and in exchange, Soviet missiles would leave Cuba. Robert Kennedy's response was that the Jupiters were already scheduled for removal. The United States could not make this a formal condition, but it would happen. What the world would hear on October the 28th was letters between heads of state. What actually ended the crisis was this conversation. That 24-hour window in which both governments had to hold every instrument still long enough for the agreement to land was the window into which October 27th fell. By 6 p.m. on Black Saturday, every escalation path was open at the same time. A U-2 was down over Cuba. Major Rudolf Anderson was dead. A second U-2 had accidentally crossed into Soviet airspace over Siberia. F-102 fighters armed with nuclear air-to-air missiles had been scrambled. The executive committee voted to respond only to Khrushchev's first letter, ignoring the second. And the captain of B-59 had just decided he was already at war. Submarine B-59 had been at sea for 27 days. It was designed for patrols of no longer than 21 days. The air recyclers were running at half capacity. Battery reserves had reached 11%. Men were falling unconscious on the deck. Captain Valentin Savitsky had not received a signal from Moscow in 4 days. The United States Navy had issued a notice to mariners explaining that practice signaling charges would be used to instruct submarines to surface, but that notice never reached the Soviet submarine captains. To Savitsky, the detonations above his hull were indistinguishable from an attack. At some point in the evening of October 27th, a salvo hit closer than anything before. Savitsky stood up from his command chair. According to signals officer Vadim Orlov, who was present that night, Savitsky turned to his officers and said something to the effect of, the war may have already started above them, and they were not going to disgrace the Navy by going down without a fight. Political officer Ivan Maslenikov agreed. The T-5 nuclear torpedo was ordered armed. Vasily Arkhipov had not spoken. What happened next is not recorded in any document with precision. The exchange between Arkhipov and Savitsky was witnessed but never fully transcribed. What exists is the testimony of Orlov, who described it decades later as an argument between two men of equal rank, one certain the war had started, one certain it had not. Archipov's argument was not emotional. It was the argument of a man who had been inside a nuclear accident and understood with technical precision what the physics looked like when it went wrong. If the Americans were attacking, he said, this submarine would already be destroyed. You do not signal a vessel you intend to sink. Surface. Await orders. If the war has started, Moscow will confirm it. Savitsky ordered B-59 to surface. At approximately 8:50 p.m. on October 27, 1962, the conning tower of B-59 broke the surface of the Atlantic. 14 American ships converged immediately. Aircraft began overflights at 20 to 30 meters above the conning tower, searchlights blinding anyone who tried to look up. An American destroyer blinked a signal lamp at the surfaced Soviet submarine. Do you need assistance? The answer came back in Morse code, slowly. No. In Washington, nobody knew. In Moscow, nobody knew. The world had passed through the closest it has ever come to nuclear exchange, and no one on either side would know Vasily Arkhipov's name for 40 years. In 2002, at the Havana conference marking the 40th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, former U.S. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara was told for the first time that the Soviet submarines had been carrying nuclear torpedoes. He went pale. He said, "We came very, very close. Closer than we knew at the time." The American destroyers that spent hours forcing B-59 to surface had no knowledge that the submarine they were circling was armed with a nuclear weapon. The officers dropping signaling charges had not been informed that a Soviet captain below them might interpret those charges as an attack. The entire confrontation happened inside a gap of information that neither government knew existed. Archipov's decision did not close that gap. He fell through it and pulled the world with him. The resolution that came the following morning, letters exchanged, missiles removed, crisis declared over, was built entirely on a foundation neither government would admit out loud. They had not been in control on Black Saturday. One Soviet naval officer had been. On October the 28th, 1962, at 9 a.m. Moscow time, Radio Moscow broadcast Khrushchev's formal response. The missiles would be withdrawn. The American public was told that firm diplomacy had prevailed. The Soviet public was told that socialist solidarity had been defended. What neither public was told was that the Jupiter missiles in Turkey were quietly removed by April 1963. The Turkey deal was kept secret for 25 years. B-59 had been armed with a nuclear torpedo. Archipov's name would not be publicly known until 2002. What the resolution produced beyond the withdrawal of missiles was the direct communication channel that both governments admitted in the aftermath had been the most dangerous absence of the entire crisis. A crisis moves faster than formal diplomatic correspondence. They needed a line. The Moscow to Washington hotline became operational on August the 30th, 1963. It was not a telephone. It was a teletype machine, 16,000 kilometers of cable via London and Copenhagen. The first message transmitted was a technical test from the American side. The test read, "The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog's back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. The hotline was built for exactly the situation B-59 had created, a crisis moving faster than communication, each side acting on incomplete knowledge of the other's intentions. Vasily Arkhipov returned to the Soviet Navy after Cuba. He was promoted, he was given commands, he was eventually made a vice admiral. He never spoke publicly about October 27th, 1962. His daughter Yelena accepted a posthumous award on his behalf in London on October 27th, 2017, the 55th anniversary of Black Saturday. She said he had never told his family what happened on B-59. He wasn't allowed to talk about it. Arkhipov died on August the 19th, 1998. His death was complications from the radiation exposure he had received on K-19, appearing in his body 37 years after the reactor. His wife Olga gave one brief statement after his death. She said, "He is the man who saved the world." He didn't think he had saved anything. He thought he had followed the correct procedure. The authorization protocol that kept the world intact on October 27th, 1962, was 3 officers with unanimous agreement and no single commander with sole authority over a nuclear weapon. That was not standard Soviet naval doctrine in 1962. It existed on B-59, only because Arkhipov happened to be aboard as Brigade Chief of Staff. On every other submarine in the flotilla that night, only 2 signatures were required. Today, Russia operates 10 nuclear-armed submarines in the Arctic and Pacific, Delta IV and Boré-class vessels, each carrying between 16 and 20 ballistic missiles. The authorization chain runs through a multi-officer structure that traces its institutional logic directly to what almost happened on B-59. In October 2022, as Russia's posture in Ukraine prompted the most serious nuclear tension since the Cold War, the Washington and Moscow hotline was activated. The infrastructure built after Cuba, the hotline, the authorization protocols, the back-channel architecture, is what prevented October 2022 from becoming what October 1962 almost became.
And that was the Cold War. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.